Welcome back, everyone. Now, when it comes to the lockdowns around the CCP virus, this COVID-19 virus, one thing we're seeing is that the constitutional rights many people have are being stomped on. Some of the people try to justify this, but we see double standards with it as well. One of the big arguments right now in society is whether the closing of churches should be allowed, when, for example, going to big stores and so on is allowed. Now, we have with us Cristian Ionescu, who is an immigrant from Romania and who escaped communist oppression there. He's a pastor in Chicago. And he's here to talk to us about what we're seeing right now and what he saw in Romania, really along the same lines, and how that turned out. Hey, Cristian, it's real great having you on.
Thank you for having me.
Now, just briefly, what is happening in Chicago right now? Of course, you're a pastor there. What's been happening?
For the last few months, I think everything was kind of quiet because after we've reopened the church and we had quite a struggle for a while, the governor had relaxed all the regulations against church meetings, and but we still have a court case pending. When they sent the police to the church and blocked the parking lot, a privately owned parking lot that we had an arrangement with a bank for the last 18 years, and we would pay every month to use that parking lot. They've sent the police next week, and they gave us citations for disorderly conduct and mob action because they didn't have anything else for us in their paperwork. They couldn't say church services there. But we still have a court case. It had been delayed month to month. We're going to be up in February. We also have another case against the governor. Our church, along with Logos Baptist Ministries, went to court, and we went through the process. We are up for a Supreme Court hearing, and we'll see what's going on. But for the last few months, they pretty much left us alone.
Now, I understand that you're challenging this. Is this because you've witnessed these same policies in the past? And I know some of your story on this. Is the reason you're challenging this because of that, or is there something more to it?
Progressivism and liberalism is a fight for the conscience of the people. It is an ideological war, and even though they say they're atheistic or agnostics, it's a religious war. Their biggest obstacle to achieving their desires to completely control the society, their biggest obstacle is the church, is religion. So it's a fight for the conscience of the people. And in Romania, it took them a few years to get rid of private property. It took them even longer to take away lands from the peasants. But the war against religion was relentless up to the point of the revolution in 1989. So communism, socialism, progressivism cannot coexist with authentic religion, doctrines, and especially Christianity, Judeo-Christian values.
I want to talk to you more about that, but first, I'm interested in hearing your story. What actually happened in Romania? What did you see personally when it came to, I think it was Ceausescu trying to eliminate religion?
Ceausescu was just a representative of a system. Whether it be him or anybody else, the system is the same. And obviously, communism came to Romania when my parents were children. I've talked to a lot of people in Romania, older people, and I asked them, how come you accepted communism? And something struck me at that time, because I was an adolescent, a teenager, and they said to me, we never accepted communism. It was imposed upon us by force. And there are many similarities between Romania of 1945, let's say, and America of today, because Romania in the 20s and 30s, before the Second World War, was a very prosperous country. Monarchy was super successful in Romania at that time. The affluence of the people, the culture and everything went through the roof, broke every ceiling in the Romanian culture at that time. And the Communist Party only had under 1,000 members before they were imposed in power by the Soviet army. So it took force to impose it. Now in America, you see that they took over the education system, the media, and all these trigger points of society. Talking about Romania, I was born in that system. So all I knew was the repression, the oppression, the force, and we are heading towards that, and we can see the signs. Per their philosophy, Marxism cannot take over a society other than by force and deceiving. And we see this in America right now. True intellectualism is oppressed in America. We have a pseudo-intellectualism in America. True prosperity in America is made to be greedy and exploitation, and it happened the same in Romania. So, but it took less in Romania to do that because of the Soviet army occupation. In America, it has to be done in a way where the younger generation is covertly assimilated into that kind of thinking, and it happened for the last few decades.
And so in Romania, you saw this done by force, of course, the Soviet army technically invading and backing the Communist Party there. In America, you're saying that it's through the basically control of institutions, ironically, a lot of the big corporations, media institutions, and people who have been educated with this Marxist worldview pushing these things through these institutions. Is this accurate?
Yes, it is. And their appeal, and by what I say, I'm talking about what happened in Romania and what I see happening in America right now. When you condition a society to collectively think in terms of surviving, desperate for survival, you will get them to accept anything. This is the reason anytime the government imposes something and mandates something, I'm very suspicious. Because in Romania, they would say the whole country should accept this and should accept that. And it was for the common good. But a government should be able in a democracy to convince people to accept something, not mandate it. This is the difference between totalitarianism and democracy. And what I see in America right now, even with this pandemic, and not only that, it is a rush to impose mandates. And when people fight for their own survival and are desperate to survive, and they've exploited that in Romania and in every country conquered by socialism, progressivism, and communism, because they're sister ideologies, I see it in America. Desperation for survival, and they exploit that.
Now, how did this play out in Romania when it came to the religious persecutions?
They've infiltrated the church. We had a lot of pastors that were not true believers. We had all our institutions, educational, evangelistic, missionary, were infiltrated. Some of the pastors were sabotaged, eliminated when they didn't cooperate. If they cooperated, they had some advantages and privileges. And what I've seen in America from a religious standpoint, and obviously I came here in 1987, but I've been an avid reader of history and recent history, and in religious terms also. I've seen the infiltration of colleges and seminaries of theological orientation. And you had the counter-revolution in the 70s in the Southern Baptist Convention, which was 17, 18 million strong, where they purged the seminaries and the educational institutions of secular professors and teachers. But the fight continued for about 30, 40 years, and now they've fallen back into a progressive and secularist ideology in religious seminaries. We see a lot of churches led by progressive pastors, liberal pastors, and they've infiltrated traditional denominations. And it happened the same in Romania, to the point where the dissidents could be singled out, isolated, and in the end eliminated. And we're seeing this in America, going towards that in America right now.
You know, this is very interesting. There's a book by a Romanian high-ranking general who defected to the West, Ion Mihai Pacepa, called Disinformation. And he details how under Ceausescu, he, of course, carried out these operations to infiltrate the churches, and how they replicated that system to target the United States, including, for example, targeting the World Council of Churches, other groups like this, that he himself, as a high-ranking general who defected later and revealed these things, was directly engaged in these operations. And so your observations of this are very interesting. Now, when they infiltrated the churches, you mentioned, of course, now a lot of people wouldn't see being a progressive as a bad thing. They might think, oh, well, you know, people have different viewpoints, different opinions. But you're stating it as an intentional agenda. How do you see, is this accurate, first off, and how do you see this playing out?
First and foremost, we need to understand that Marxist ideology is about controlling the whole society. And when you want to control the whole society, you cannot have peaks. You have to equalize everything. Now, you have an elite, the communist elite in a country that would control everything, and they have all kinds of privileges and advantages. But the idea is to equalize the society, not to have peaks, not to have a landscape, not to have a skyline. You need to equalize society. And in some countries, they use conservatism to equalize society. In some countries, they use liberalism to equalize society. If they go to a very backwards, so they call it, country, where there are strong traditional values, they will exploit those values. And they will eliminate the intellectual elites. They will eliminate their own to equalize the society. Look at these movements. Now, of course, religious people are against the abuse of women. But the Me Too movement is a cannibalistic movement. They are destroying their own because they want to bring down every single peak in every societal compartment. So sometimes they will disguise as conservatives. Sometimes they will disguise as socialists, as liberals. But socialists, communists, in the end, will act against God, against any kind of competitive authority, and will destroy all the peaks in a society. And let me elaborate a little bit on that competitive authority. They're fighting against family. Why? Parental authority. They're fighting against churches. Why? Spiritual authority. They're trying to destroy any kind of competitive and parallel form of authority because they cannot share that. So yes, they are liberal, they're progressive at core, but they can use the basic format of a society against itself. You'd see the divisions they create. Everywhere where they can put a wedge, they will do it. They will divide us by gender. They will divide us by race. They will divide us by class. They will divide us by education. They will divide us in so many forms. Because in the end, the more compartments they create and the more divided we are, they're going to take us one by one. They're going to be conservative with us against one group. They're going to be liberal with one group against us. At the core, they are progressive. They're liberals. But they can work with everybody against everybody else with one goal and only one goal in mind: to equalize society, destroy competitive forms of authority, and impose total control upon the society.
Now, I know in one element of this, when you talk about methods of subverting a society to make it ripe for communist revolution, this has been described before as different methods to cause disharmony and conflict within society. The very basis of Marxism, dialectical materialism, is about finding different areas of social harmony and causing discord within those to create this conflict, this struggle of opposites, as they call it. Your explanation of this is very interesting, that this intentional creation of conflict, the purpose of it is to basically break down the elements that form a society, of different groups being able to interact harmoniously and breaking those apart. Is this accurate? And two, what kind of society does that create? You lived in Romania, where this was further along under Ceausescu. What kind of society did that make?
Well, first of all, when we're talking about conflict, Marxists are not apologetic about it. And obviously, some socialists and some progressives are going to step away from the Marxist agenda. But no, just as a decoy. In the back of their minds, Marxist ideology is at the core of their philosophy, actions, and strategy. And in Romania, they would teach us in school, unapologetically, communism and Marxism can never be imposed in a society in a peaceful way. They will be upfront about it. We need revolution. We need fighting. We need bloodshed. Why? Because people will never voluntarily give up their freedoms, their possessions, and their privileges. So you need to take them away from these bloodsuckers, that's how they would portray them, by force. So they are not apologetic about it. But to get there, they have to create as much hate and as much division as possible. Now, what I saw in Romania, they went past taking control of the society. They already had it. But how do you maintain it? You create a society of fear, of survival, lacking basics, and getting them as a result of the government handouts. And this is how the government creates total control in a society. And I've seen the American society diverted towards that mindset. The government should do this and that for us. The government should provide this and that for us. And I am amazed to see the American people who were bred to be such a self-reliant people, such an innovative people, people that don't look at handouts for handouts, being conditioned to accept this kind of government brother who would provide for you. This is terrible. It happened in Romania. You had a little bit of meat, you had a little bit of milk, you had a little bit of bread. It was because the government would provide it. You have the job, it was because the government will provide it. As long as you would fall in line and you will not be individualistic about your opinions, about your religion, about your position or your opinions on anything.
And we see some of this happening now in the United States with censorship, with political correctness, that people, for example, can be censored, have their websites removed, like Parler, for example, has been deplatformed now, if they don't follow this political correct narrative, if they don't agree to censor, if they don't agree to follow the party line, essentially. You know, it's interesting because in China, the idea of political correctness that was Mao Zedong 1967 was around what you're talking about, actually, that if you're politically correct, following the party line, you can be awarded some degree of benefits. We see this now in America, as you mentioned, for example, in Romania, where if you follow the party, you have a job, you have some food, you have some benefits. We see this in America now, where if you follow the political correct narrative, you can maybe be free from criticism, that you won't be attacked by these institutions, that you can keep your job, don't risk getting fired, possibly. I'm curious if you see this same social dynamic as well. Do you feel this is an accurate comparison?
Absolutely. And the best you can see it is amongst the ranks of the liberals and progressives. I said that communism is a cannibalistic society at its core. And they have absolutely no problems with throwing their own to the wolves. In Romania, once a person had ended its usefulness, it doesn't matter how big of a name it was, how big of a position he held, he was eliminated. The most famous case of communist cannibalism is the case of a lawyer, Lucreciu Pătrășcanu. He was one of the intellectuals that cooperated with communists and Russians in taking over Romania, but then he found himself loving Romania and being a nationalist. And that didn't fall in line with the Soviet-imposed philosophy, which was subservient to the Russian domination. So he was completely eliminated, shot and killed and destroyed. So what happens, this environment of fear, of falling in line and getting just the basics, not too much privilege, just the basics, is also employed within the ranks of communists. I see these very rich people in America, progressive people. They donate. They are so in love with socialist ideas. It's almost demonic. Obviously, I'm a pastor. Only Satan employs a philosophy that destroys himself, fights God for his own destruction. These people don't understand that the first thing the communists will do is take away their possessions, take away their wealth. It's like a suicidal philosophy, in a way, for them. For these rich people that are falling in line with the socialist ideas. It's amazing. It's amazing to support a philosophy that will come after whatever you have. So this is what they do. And they will have a society with fear. I saw people that were generals during monarchy. They were professors. You would look at them, they would have some clothes that were very old, worn out, but you could see they were very expensive when they were new. And they will just go with a little bag, standing in long lines for a piece of bread. They used to be great people. They used to be intellectuals. They used to be the higher-ups of the Romanian society. They were completely crushed by the system. And amazingly, some of them, not all of them, but some of them, just for survival purposes, fell in line.
Now, early on in this interview, you mentioned that communism is like a religion, and you described this as being a competing ideology with religions and with other power structures, that it wants to eliminate any power that could contest its own power, including up to belief in God and religion itself, to even destroy that level because it wants to replace that essentially. A lot of people would argue, of course, communism, Marxism is atheistic. To say it's religious, they would have trouble believing it. What would you tell these people?
Labels are not important for communists. They can be whatever you want them to be. And their intent in the end is control and completely destroy any kind of peak, intellectual, property-wise, business-wise. They want to equalize the society. This is their main objective. Now, they are going to use a lot of unaware people. They will have a lot of patsies inside the society. They will use, these people are unaware, they're ignorant of the true intentions of the core philosophy of communism. And they will have one issue, abortion. They will have one issue, gender equality. They will have one issue, alternative lifestyles. They will have one issue, same-sex marriage. They will have one issue. And holding on that issue, they're going to be hooked by the Marxist movement and used as they are unaware of the true intentions behind the scenes. So communists are not apologetic about that. They will use pretty much anything and anybody. You can put any kind of labels on them and they don't care as long as they achieve their goal. And what happened in 1989, Romanian Revolution? The Romanian people uprising. We don't want socialism anymore. We want capitalism. Now, who had all the controls? Communists. So they came, I imagine this like a theater play. What's up with you all people? Well, we don't want socialism. What do you want? Capitalism. Okay, but hey, we're the capitalists. So they took over the property, and it's them. And so many years from the revolution, you still see the hooks and the lines of socialism and communism in Romania. So they don't care about labels. They don't care about what you name them. They don't care if you disagree with them in 99 points. They can hook you on one, and you do their bidding. And this is what happens in America.
Yeah, real briefly, the same thing happened with Russia and other communist regimes, that the socialist system collapsed, or the communist system collapsed, but the people who had all the wealth were the communist leaders, and they just used the wealth to buy up all the institutions and businesses and properties and then controlled the future capitalist system through that anyways. The same people who were in power stayed in power. Yeah, just observing this. But yeah, I'm curious now, you're talking about now seeing this in America. And a lot of people, I think they can see hints of it, but maybe not as clear as maybe you can, because of course, you can draw these comparisons to what you actually experienced. For Americans who don't believe that communism is trying to get here and trying to work through the institutions, possibly, it does seem. For these people, what would you tell them in terms of how does communism exist in America?
You see, talking about the parallels between what's happening in America and what happened in Romania. Romania was as anti-Bolshevism as you would find anywhere on this planet. Anti-communism, anti-Bolshevism. The Romanian society was so anti-Russian Bolshevism that they had a pact with Hitler and Germany, which was a terrible, terrible situation they found themselves in. I mean, aligning yourself with the devil to fight the devil. But they did it because Romania was such anti-communism and such anti-Bolshevism, they would rather fight along Germany than be with the Russians. Now, I talked to a very old person while I was employed in Romania. He was a colleague, probably 1 or 2 years to being retired. And I asked him, I said, were you so enamored with the communist philosophies? How could you be duped into it? And he said, no, we were not. As a matter of fact, during the 20s and 30s in Romania, everybody would look across the border and would say, that would never work in Romania. We're too monarchy-oriented. I mean, the people loved the king. They demonstrated for the king, even after communists took power. They would have huge demonstrations, hundreds of thousands of people protesting all over Romania and in favor of the king. So they said it will never work in Romania. This will never work in Romania. Well, bring people into a survival mode and anything will work.
Now, when it comes to what's happening in the United States, again, you're a pastor in Chicago, and you've been standing up against these lockdown measures. Does this experience inform your decision to challenge these lockdowns when it comes to, for example, stopping churches from meeting?
Well, first and foremost, I am a pastor of souls, and I consider myself responsible for the well-being of the church. Closing down a church, and people should understand, church is not a video game. Church is not an online affair. Church has to be physical, and it has to be a gathering, and has to be fellowship, physical fellowship. This is at the core and is an elemental, basic survival prerogative of a church and religious activity, obviously. And for me, closing down churches was a death sentence for the church. And I waited for about 6 weeks to see what's going on with the pandemic, inform myself. And at some point, I saw the hypocrisy of the government officials. They should have known better than everybody how dangerous is or is not this pandemic. And they surely didn't act like it here and there. They afforded themselves some privileges that they cut everybody else from having. So I saw the hypocrisy. Secondly, I saw the timing. I saw the originating place. I saw what they were trying to get to. I saw the hypocrisy when they condoned rather large demonstrations with no restrictions, but then they banned others, which were democracy and religious in nature. And I said, this is not holding water. This is a hoax. I'm not saying that the virus is not real, but I say the reaction to the virus is an orchestrated effort to destroy the church, to destroy conservatives, to destroy people with basic values and traditional values in a society. And at worst, it was programmed and originated deliberately. At best, it was exploited and used for their purpose. And when I saw through that, I said, no way in the world we're going to abide by it.
And your response, of course, has been through legal action. You're challenging these through, legal means. It's a big step for a lot of
civil disobedience. And civil disobedience because we held services against their regulations.
Now, to do that is to put your own reputation on the line, to put your own well-being on the line, and to risk very large fines. To do that is not an easy stance, to challenge it and to refuse to follow it. For yourself, in terms of what motivates you to take that stance, what is it? How would you explain this?
See, when I came from Romania, my first motivator was to be free to prosper, to be free to exercise my belief and my faith, and to be part of this generous and wonderful human dream, not American dream, human dream that America was, and I hope it still is. So everything that attacks that motivation, I will fight it. I personally do not care about my reputation as long as I know that I'm standing on right. Right by Constitution, because we have the First Amendment that protects us against the intervention and regulations of government. Number two, doctrine and belief and the Bible, who tells me God gave me these rights. And even if the Constitution would go against us, God still is on our side, so I will follow that. And thirdly, I believe at my core that my role in my very limited space, pastoring a church, is to ensure the well-being spiritually and otherwise of my people. And when I see that threatened, I will stand against it.
Now, a lot of people, I guess just last question, a lot of people right now seeing all these problems in society, seeing the attacks on mostly conservatives, the censorship, the deplatforming, the labeling, the attacks on character, the attempts to get people fired from their jobs, a lot of people are feeling very hopeless and very apathetic. For these people, what would you tell them at this time?
First and foremost, exercise your faith in an authentic way. Believe and live what you believe. Be authentic in your faith. Secondly, fight the good fight in your corner of the woods. Just be there for your people, for your community, and fight the good fight. What conservatives have failed to recognize is that you can influence people around you. You have to work every day at it. Liberals did it for about 50, 60 years now. And they've conquered step by step almost the whole society. They have some holes to cover. I think conservatives had lost when they abandoned the big cities, which are very populated, and a lot of electoral votes. I think they failed when they didn't recognize the assault on the education system. They failed to recognize when churches were infiltrated and drawn to the left. They failed to recognize the maneuvers and the strategies of the left for so long. And they thought that just by spreading wealth and prosperity, people would embrace it. They didn't understand that ideology counts for more than that. And these people would sacrifice a lot for their ideology. And so should we. I think we should sacrifice our time, our energy, and try to change people's minds. We can only do that from a religious standpoint, because people will seldom be subject to influence if there is not a religious component. That's why Marxism and atheism work together. There always is a religious component. And I think America has to get back to its believing God, and that's where it should start, a spiritual revival.
Hey, Cristian Ionescu, great having you on. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me. God bless you.